All right, so in this video, we're going to take a look at the Great Depression and some things that led up to the Great Depression. So remember, cotton has always been Georgia's cash crop. So a lot of farmers, because it was making them money, a lot of farmers were, especially Georgia farmers, were growing a lot of cotton. But unfortunately, if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, you don't leave room for other things. So a lot of experts were telling farmers to diversify, which means they wanted to say basically you should grow things other than just cotton because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So unfortunately for those farmers, because they didn't listen, this little insect here came to be called the boll weevil. And the boll weevil basically would prick a hole in the cotton, like you see in the picture here, and they would lay their eggs inside the cotton. So eventually, because of those eggs, the cotton ended up dying. So like here. So cotton bales in Georgia went from 1.75 millions a year to 588,000 in 1923. That's a huge drop. So as you can imagine, you're not able to make bale of cotton in high quantity. They're losing money. Then not only was the boll weevil catastrophic, now you have a huge drought that's affecting America from 1924 to 27. So if you don't have rain, you can't grow anything. So towns end up looking like this. So with all this going on with the boll weevil and droughts, farmers couldn't really make money and they couldn't live. So a lot of them ended up leaving their farm behind and moving to more urban cities like Atlanta or to the north to find work. Now, another thing that kind of led to the Great Depression was something called consumerism. And consumerism is basically when somebody is going out and they're spending more money and they're not really saving. So if you're spending more, you're not really saving for a rainy day, then anything can happen. Then the overproduction of things also led to the Great Depression. So overproduction. So remember we talked about how those cotton farmers earlier were making so much cotton that they put all the eggs in one basket. So they were overproducing cotton. Same thing with other people in other industries. They were overproducing so much stuff that people weren't really buying it, and they couldn't buy it as quick as they were producing it. So unfortunately, because they produced more than they were selling, they had to end up throwing away a lot of that wasted stuff. So a lot of farmers, for example, in this picture, this is a farmer, and he's throwing out barrels of milk that he didn't sell. Then the biggest thing that pretty much like the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to the Great Depression was the stocks. So stocks, if you're not familiar with stocks are when companies sell stocks or put in the stock market, and you can buy stocks. And if those stocks do well, you can make money. If they don't do well, you can lose money. So at this particular time in history, the 1920s, people got a tip that, hey, stocks were going up way more than they were worth. So you have all the people buying stock all of a sudden. Then, unfortunately, those same stocks they were buying ended up going down to what they were truly worth, which was not a whole lot. So people started to panic, and they sold their stocks, or basically pulled their money from the stock market. Which, if you're having all these people pulling their money from the stock market at one time, that's not good. And the stock market ended up crashing. So on October 29th, the stock market officially crashed, which is also known as Black Tuesday. So Black Tuesday marked the official start of the Great Depression. So when the stock market crashed and the depression began, you had people who were millionaires and multimillionaires or thousandaires at least, and now they're poor. Then unemployment started to raise. People were losing their homes. People were losing their savings, the little savings they did have. Then not only that, you have banks going under because banks were going under because people were withdrawing all their money from the banks. So remember, banks were not like today where they kind of have an influx of money and they're protected. Back in this time, basically the money that was invested or in the bank was all the money they had. So banks started to run out of money because people were pulling all their life savings out. So the banks started to go under. Then this marks the beginning of the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, when you hear that term, it was basically a period when unemployment was high and there wasn't really much economic growth during this time. So here's a picture. You can see a woman and her two of her 7 children, and they're living in what's called Hooversville, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. So in cotton specifically, in Georgia specifically, cotton dropped to 5 cents per pound, and within a year, many farmers lost their land and moved to cities to find work. So they moved to cities like Atlanta. So Atlanta's population grew tremendously from during this time, and it grew to about 200,000 people. And a lot of those sharecroppers and tenant farmers, remember those? A lot of those being African Americans, they end up leaving Georgia altogether, or some came to Atlanta as well, or they started heading north for to find work because again they're trying to make ends meet. So now if the farms are worthless, then I gotta eat, so I gotta go somewhere else. So we're gonna talk about some of President Roosevelt in the New Deal tomorrow. We talk about the New Deal, but I do want to kind of hit on President Roosevelt and why and his importance in Georgia's history or Georgia specifically. So Franklin Roosevelt, who was one of our presidents, he's right here. He came to a town called Warm Springs, Georgia. So Warm Springs, Georgia is like it's a little country town, not like a few hours from Covington. And President Roosevelt has something called polio, and polio is a disease that hinders people from being able to walk properly. And I know it's more medical terminology too. This is a simplified version. So he came to Warm Springs, Georgia, in this little house here. It's called the Little White House, and it still stands today. It's a museum in tribute to him. And those Warm Springs and that pool, they were able to kind of help him use his limbs to his fullest ability while he was in them, and to help give him treatment. So during this time in Georgia, President Roosevelt were meeting a lot of people who were being affected by the Great Depression. So a lot of those New Deal policies he came up with was because of his time spent here in Georgia, such as the REA, which is one of the New Deal policies where it allowed light in rural cities who didn't have light at night before. Now there is a center in Warm Springs that is used to kind of help and rehabilitate stroke and injury victims, and this is FDR during his funeral procession.